Hello! Today we're talking about the article To Veil the Threat of Terror by Dana Cloud, and we're also going to talk about how visual contexts influence visual arguments. And this is the final step in analyzing your culturally important image before you put everything all together into a poster explaining all of this great analysis that you've been doing. So let's get going. First, I'm going to just go over really quickly three of the most famous images from this photo series. You should have looked at the whole photo documentary that went along with the article. I made you a PowerPoint of it because the original Time magazine piece has been taken offline now, although I did also give you a link to the Internet Archive version of it, so you can actually go and look at it online in that form. But here is this is the first image from that series, and this is one of the most iconic ones. And here we see a woman in blue, just her back, and there's this very strong sense of a person in need of rescue. We've got this alone in ruins, and it harkens back to this like princess in a castle kind of thing, right? But crumbling ruins as well. And you've got this like flowing veil kind of sense to it. And there's very much alone in a wilderness in what used to be a castle land, but now isn't. And so you need a knight in shining armor to come along and rescue the princess, right? And you can see here a lot of the points that Cloud was making in the article about the women in need of rescue kind of argument that these photos start to elicit and start to create when you see them. Here's another one of the photos from that series, and we have a woman and a man, and the man is holding up a burqa, and the woman is standing there wearing one. And here is a very clear example of the relationship between the way that men operate and the way that women operate here. That men are like, all right, here, wear this, right? And the different levels of freedom that genders have. And there's none of the sociopolitical or historical background on what goes along with veiling or anything like that. It's just here's a woman, we can't even see her face. She has no freedoms, and here is a man saying, wear this thing that makes you completely indistinguishable. And we have these just rows and rows and rows of indistinguishable pieces of cloth that make everyone the same, every woman the same, right? And then finally, we have this picture of men going nuts over a doll, a hula doll, and they don't look like they're behaving in a way that's super trustworthy or mature, or what we would consider to be, well, what Dana Cloud would argue civilized, but instead they look like they are reacting very strongly and aggressively and sexually to this child's toy, which we would consider to be very immature and perhaps dangerous even, that they're unable to control themselves, and therefore they're maybe not safe for women to be around if they can't even control themselves around a doll. And so these are the men that we're going to have to save the women from, right? All right, so let's talk about some image contexts. And this, by the way, is the inside of the Blue Mosque, one of the main places of worship in Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. I did not take this picture. I got this from the internet. I myself have not been to Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is the main source of lapis lazuli mines. Lapis lazuli being the blue that is used on King Tut's tomb in Egypt, that was used to make the blue paint that has been used throughout history to paint the Virgin Mary's clothing, and that for a very long time was the only source of blue pigment that we had reliably. So Afghanistan is one of the only reliable places, Afghanistan and Iran, I think, are some of the only reliable places to get this blue stone. And so a blue mosque makes sense to have in this place. So this is Kabul, Kabul's famous blue mosque, the interior of it. All right, so today we're going to talk about 4 image contexts. We talked about 3 of these already. Last time we were talking about the parts of images, but I want to elaborate on them and practice using them more, as today you're going to finish up your context assignment. So first is the immediate visual context. Second, the immediate written context. Third, visual culture. And then the cultural context. And I will go over these in detail in just a moment. So first, immediate visual context. What is happening in the image? What is happening in this image? There's a shark swimming on a street. What do you see? I see a shark. I see that it's swimming in water, but that water appears to be on a flooded road. And I can tell it's a road because there are concrete barriers on the side, and also the photo is taken from a car window. Yeah. And then part of immediate visual culture are what clues there are as to what's happening, what's important, when it's taking place, where, and why. So you're just kind of like searching the image for some clues. So if I look more closely, I can see there's like a front loader up here. There's some sort of construction going on top of this thing above the road. But overall, like the main thing is the shark and that it's in the road. All right, so a shark is swimming in water that is flooding a road. That's a weird thing to have going on. Now let's add some immediate written context. That's whatever description there is that goes along with the image. This can also be verbal context if somebody is explaining the image to you. But here we have a caption, and that is most commonly what we get. So that's the immediate written context. And here we just want to see what do the words say about it. So here we have the words, just a shark swimming on the streets in Houston. And I will add some oral context for you, some verbal context, that this was posted immediately after a major hurricane flooded Houston. Okay, so we have a shark swimming on the streets in Houston right after it's been flooded by a hurricane. Okay. Yikes. So the caption adds some context for how this might have happened, right? Where it is. So we get a where, which is helpful, right? We get a how, which is helpful. We get a when from the verbal caption, which is helpful. And we maybe even get a why, right? Okay. How about visual culture? What do you know about images that you can apply here? So, for example, you know that T-Rexes don't live right now, and so this couldn't possibly be here, right? You know that T-Rexes are from another time and place, and so this must be an altered photo. But you also know that this image is making fun of the shark image. And in fact, this was posted as my 4-year-old grandson prefers this fake photo over your fake photo, right? And this, in fact, calls into question how you know whether a photo is real or not. We look at this one and we immediately know that this photo is not real because you know that T-Rexes cannot be in the streets of Houston like this, right? I suppose it could be a sculpture of some sort, but because you've seen that other image of the shark, you know that there's nothing in this street like this, and so you know that this couldn't be here either. And so now you know that neither of these images is real, that both of them are fake, because you have these two images together. And you know that because you are fluent in visual culture. You have experiences and knowledge that you have gained through seeing things, and you draw on that database, that bank of knowledge of symbols and having seen things before. So now you know that first photo was fake, and in fact that image of a shark swimming in streets circulates every single time there is any kind of flooding in a coastal city in the US, particularly because of hurricanes. It has been circulating for over a decade now, I think, and every single time people think it's real and they circulate it again, and it still isn't, but people think it is, and it keeps going. Sharks don't like to go in really muddy water because they have to breathe it, and it's like breathing super dirty air. That's not their thing. So that's not a thing that you're likely to ever see. If they're there, they don't want to be there. That's not a picture you're gonna get. But it is a thing that would freak people out, so they do like to share it when they see it. All right, and then you have the cultural context, and sometimes this is stuff like Dana Cloud was talking about, like, we are in a war with these people and we're trying to justify why we're having a war with them. But sometimes it's things like you have to know about the other picture for this one to make sense, right? I love this picture. I think it's hilarious. It doesn't make any darn sense if you haven't seen the other shark swimming in the water picture, right? If you haven't seen that, then this doesn't make any sense and it's not a joke. Now, memes, this is another response to the same shark meme or photo that I showed you at the beginning of this. And memes rely on many different layers of visual culture. They rely on you knowing the trope of bull riding, which is not a Houston thing, but is a Texas thing. And so that's a cultural norm you need to know about, and a visual culture that you need to know about. So that's not a thing you have to know about for memes in general, but it's a thing you have to know about for this meme. For this meme, you also have to know about the impact typeface being used as a way of framing an image, right? And the meanwhile in is a trope, right? It's a meme in and of itself. It's a meme form. And the riding a great white shark, right? All of these things are layers on layers. You have to know a lot of different things for this to make sense as an image, right? And if you don't know all those things, this doesn't make any sense as an image. How about this one? What cultural knowledge do you have to have for this to make sense as a meme? Think about it. There's like 8 things you have to know. Otherwise, this is just weird. Okay, it's just weird anyway, right? But to understand what's going on in this image, you have to know a bunch of cultural things. All right, so let's talk context in terms of the Kabul Unveiled photo essay that John Stanmeyer did for Time magazine. And this is the main set of images that Dana Cloud was discussing in her article. And I'm just going to talk about this particular image, the very first image that just goes with the title to the photo essay, and talk about the different kinds of context that go with this. So this is what the beginning of the photo essay on Time's website looked like when it was originally posted, and I want to go through with you the way that the context works. All right, so we want to talk about the immediate visual context first. So we see here what appears to be a woman, perhaps a mother. She is holding a baby. The baby has its mouth open and its eyes closed. The mother is wearing a piece of clothing that has a lot of embroidery on it. The baby is wearing a piece of clothing that has ribbons and embroidery and decorations of various sorts. It looks maybe ceremonial. The mother is looking up, and we can see some really interesting lines happening, especially with the background walls and the ways that the lines are moving in the background. They align with her sight lines to be looking up and out. And there's a lot of interesting things happening with the lines there. But basically what we appear to be seeing is a woman holding a child, presumably her child, and she looks maybe a little thin, maybe a little tired. She's not smiling, maybe a little sad. I don't know. So don't have a lot of immediate context. The immediate written context is Kabul unveiled. This woman is not wearing a head covering or face covering or any sort of thing like that. Caption says that everything changed when the Taliban left Afghanistan's capital. The caption says that there's a new situation for the Afghan women and their role in politics, the economy, culture, religion, medicine, and motherhood. And then there's this picture of this woman. So we assume that she is a representative of Afghan women here. We assume that she's an Afghan woman. We assume that this is her child, that she is experiencing motherhood, and that she is in a new situation. She doesn't seem to be liking it very much, but she's in a new situation of some kind. For visual contexts, I'm going to talk about those on the next screen. In cultural context, we'll talk about in a moment. And then we also want to think about the implications of each. So it's interesting that this woman was chosen to be the face of everything has changed and the new situation for women. Like I said, she doesn't. This woman doesn't look like she's sure about the new situation, or that she's entirely happy with the new situation, or that it's going super well for her. And it's been a long time since this war in Afghanistan now. This was 2002, roughly. And we now have a lot of celebrations of women in Kabul who had very positive experiences of the Taliban leaving and immediately went back to work. And in fact, in this photo essay, there's a woman who was like, "Yay, they left, okay, I'm going on TV because I'm a broadcaster." Right? Or another woman who's a philosophy professor who's been still teaching classes the whole time, even when the Taliban was there. Or there's the Kabul Beauty School, the bookseller of Kabul. Like there are a lot of stories of women in Kabul who continue to live their lives against oppression and opposition, who could have been placed here, but who were not. This woman in a much more traditional role of motherhood is the woman who was chosen And this woman who's not smiling, who's not celebrating, who's not happy, who in fact looks perhaps pitiable, is the woman who is chosen to be the face of this photo essay, is the person who is at the beginning here for us. And that's telling, because this was a deliberate choice that was made by John Stanmeyer and Time magazine. All right. So let's talk about the visual context. And I'm going to talk about just a few of my initial impressions. So what comes to mind for me immediately when I see this image? So the first thing that came to mind was Madonna and Child. This image just immediately made me think of Madonna and Child images, and just kind of that iconography. The way her hair is framing her head makes me think about Madonna and Child, the way that she's holding the child, the way that she's looking up, her look of kind of endurance, really makes me think Madonna and Child. It also makes me think of an overwhelmed mother in need of help, right? And it's hard to tell whether this baby is yawning or crying. I think on close inspection, the baby is yawning because of particular wrinkle lines, but still, it could be crying. I don't know. It isn't peacefully sleeping, for sure. It also makes me think of early portraits of Native Americans. This one's by George Carlin, who is one of the most famous American painters of Native American people. He just traveled around. Well, he painted a lot of Native Americans who came to Washington, D.C., but he also traveled around and painted different people. And there's a similar sort of treatment here of, like, this person is different and weird and not like us. And then it also makes me think of the Sacagawea coin, just the, like, mother who is simultaneously expected to be able to do everything and yet not thought of as capable or competent, really. And yeah, so these are just the 4 things that most immediately come to mind for me out of the many parts of visual culture, but these are the things in visual culture that this image reminds me of, and that it kind of pings for me. And there are lots of other things, and I could spend a lot more time looking at this, but these are the 4 things that immediately come to mind for me. And then the cultural context, and here I do want to say that for those of you who, unlike me, were not in college when this happened, which is all of you, the United States invaded Afghanistan as a response to the attacks, as a response to 9/11. So 9/11 happened, the World Trade Centers were bombed, the Pentagon, Flight 93 and 193, and the U.S. said, well, we have to go to war and find the people who did this, and we determined that the country we were going to go to war with about it was Afghanistan. So we went to war with Afghanistan, and that was very controversial, because the people who had carried out the attacks were from Saudi Arabia, not Afghani, but the leader of the organization that had coordinated the attacks was living in Afghanistan. So we started bombing Afghanistan, and at the time, Afghanistan had a very strict religious and militant government, totalitarian government, and so we overthrew the government. We bombed the city, the main cities. We invaded the country. We killed a lot of people, a lot of soldiers and a lot of civilians, and just kind of like took over everything. And eventually we found Osama bin Laden, the leader we were looking for, in one of the cave systems, which we had incidentally built for anti-Soviet purposes in the 60s and 70s. Afghanistan is really mountainous, and so it's pretty easy to build cave systems there, and so we had built a bunch there. The CIA had built a bunch there, and then we had withdrawn from the area, and so they ended up using them. But we knew where they were, so that was helpful. Anyway, so we were at war with Afghanistan. And because people were not exactly sure why we were bombing Afghanistan and exactly the connections to why we were having a military war against another country because of a terrorist attack, because that seemed like a really loose connection, there needed to be some sort of explanation for what we were doing there that went beyond, well, it's retaliation for 9/11. And so one of those explanations was what Dana Cloud here is exploring, that we are liberating the people, the Afghan people, from the Taliban. And the Taliban was is this very totalitarian minority religious sect that doesn't let men have their beards shorter than a certain length, doesn't let women go outside without being completely covered up, has very, very, very strict rules about everything in society, and very strictly controls both civic and personal life. So, and they took over parts of Syria. That's part of what the war in Syria is about. And you can read more about what life under Taliban rule is like. In general, people do not like it. Okay, so a lot of the explanation around why we were in Afghanistan having a war became that we were liberating people from this unfair regime that they didn't want. But there's also this, the people in Afghanistan are so unlike us. They're not like us at all. They're so different and weird. And that was a very strong narrative at this time. This woman, she is not like us. There's not a sense of identification or of trying to like connect us together or say, hey, this woman is like other women who are mothers. It was very much, look at this poor woman who cannot take initiative and save herself like an American woman would. She needs rescuing. There was also a very strong paternalistic stance towards Native women, which the U.S. tends to take towards women, well, towards women of non-European countries pretty strongly, and towards women in general sometimes, which is why we had the women's suffrage movement and why we're still working on women's rights around the world. There's a very strong current of Western culture as savior in the rhetoric here, as well as in the visual images here. That if we could just get some more Western culture in here, they'd be so much better off. Along with that, we have modernity as liberation. Man, this woman, she'd be so much better if she were wearing a Nike hoodie instead of that thing. But also, well, we need to get in modern appliances and modern plumbing, and which is probably true, but not just for like going in and bombing all the houses doesn't make it so that you have better houses, right? And we were going in and saying, well, we're gonna bomb everything, but then you'll be saved because we got rid of all your bad old stuff. We also, and Dana Cloud did not talk about this very much, but we had a really, really strong story about how war is freedom, because we were destroying the bad old ways and the bad old things. And so it made space for new good things. And that maybe would make me make that look if I were this lady. And then, as Dana Cloud pointed out, and I think this is the main takeaway from her article, that we were saving brown women from brown men. And this is a refrain that happens a lot in, especially when you look at any kind of charity models, but also a lot of US war models. A lot of them are based around this idea of saving brown women from brown men who can't control themselves, who don't know how to behave, who are bad at power, who are not good at making good societies, and who don't know how to take care of their families. And this is a refrain that we have about social programs in the United States. This is a refrain we have about micro-lending programs. This is a refrain that we have about wars. And it shows up continually over and over and over all over the place. So we want to keep our eyes out for this one because it can be pretty insidious. All right, so now it is your turn. You're going to do two different things. First, I want you to practice with the Cobble unveiled photos. Choose 3 images and look at the 4 types of context for each, keeping in mind what you learned reading Cloud's article. And this is engagement assignment 8, context and clouds. This is another shot of the interior of the Blue Mosque, by the way, during the daytime, not at night. And then you're going to, part 2, analyze your image. So you want to look at the 4 types of context in your image and finish the image context assignment. Finally, some of you started working on this before we even started being an online class, and now you're going to actually finish it. As you do this, make sure that you document all the sources that you use and make citation cubes with them. And you do not need to worry about the method part. We are not going to be doing that this semester because I really needed to go over that in person with you, I think, and we just are not going to be able to. So finish the image context assignment, make citation cubes for every citation that, or every source that you use. You must have at least 5. You must turn in at least 5, but you must have a citation for every source you use. So if you use more than 5 sources in finding out the different kinds of context, you need to make more than 5 citation cubes. Some of the example posters that I gave you have large citation cubes on them. Your citation cubes on your poster do not need to be so large. They may be like 2 inches by 2 inches. That's fine. And I will talk more about that when I talk about assembling your poster next class, which is Tuesday. But for now, finish your context assignment and make some citation cubes, and I will see you next week. Don't touch anybody else's face. Bye.